There is a woman who has been looked at more than almost anyone in human history, billions of eyes. Over 500 years. And somehow, after all of that, after the books, the documentaries, the postcards, the coffee mugs, we still don't know why we're looking. We're told it's because of a smile that supposedly hides a secret. But what if that's not it at all? What if the real secret isn't in the painting, but in what happened to it? Because somewhere between a quiet workshop in Florence and a glass case in Paris, something strange occurred. A 400-year-old portrait of a merchant's wife became the most recognized face on earth. And almost nobody asks the only question that actually matters. Not why is she smiling, but how does this painting, out of every painting ever made, end up here? Stick around, because the answer is stranger than the smile. Every year, close to 9 million people walk through the doors of the Louvre. A huge number of them are not here for the museum. They're here for one room, one wall, one painting, sealed in bulletproof glass, roped off so far back that you can barely make out the brushwork. Most of these people have never read a single page of art history. Most of them couldn't tell you who painted the raft of the Medusa hanging 2 rooms over, even though it's bigger, bolder, and arguably more technically dazzling. But they know her. They knew her before they ever got on a plane. They knew her in grade school, in cartoons, in 100 parodies they saw before they ever saw the original. That's the part that should stop you. We don't discover the Mona Lisa. We recognize her, like running into a celebrity, like seeing a face you've known your whole life. And here's the question nobody seems to sit with long enough. What did this painting do that thousands of other masterpieces, painted by equally brilliant hands, hanging in equally grand museums, did not? The Louvre alone holds work by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Caravaggio. Geniuses, all of them. None of them have a gift shop dedicated entirely to their face. So either this is, by some enormous margin, the single greatest painting human beings have ever produced, or something else happened. Something outside the frame. To find out, we have to go back. Not to the museum, not to the crowds, to the man who painted her, and who, for reasons that still don't fully make sense, could not seem to let her go. In 1503, a Florentine silk merchant named Francesco del Giocondo commissioned a portrait of his wife, Lisa's. This was an ordinary request. Wealthy men did this constantly. Pay an artist, get a likeness, hang it in the house, move on with your life. Leonardo da Vinci took the commission, and then he simply never gave it back. Da Vinci worked on this single portrait for somewhere between 14 and 16 years. He carried it with him from Florence to Milan, then across the Alps into France, where he would spend his final years in the service of King Francis I Francesco, and Lisa del Giocondo never received their painting. Think about how strange that is. This wasn't a passion project he started for himself. Someone paid for this. Someone was presumably waiting on it, and Leonardo just kept it. Layer after layer of paint applied so thin they're nearly transparent, a technique called sfumato, Italian for vanished into smoke. He kept softening the edges, kept adjusting the eyes, kept returning to her year after year, decade after decade, as if she were unfinished business he couldn't close out. So why? One theory, pure perfectionism. Leonardo was famous, almost notorious, for abandoning or endlessly delaying his commissions. He once spent over a decade on another painting, The Virgin and Child with St. Anne, and never delivered that one either. He may have simply never believed any of his work was finished. Late in life, by some accounts, he expressed regret that he had never truly completed anything. Another theory, this painting had become something closer to a laboratory, a place where he tested ideas about light, atmosphere, the way a human face actually behaves when it's not posing for a portrait but caught, mid-thought, mid-breath. And then there's the theory that unsettles people most, that somewhere in the process, the painting stopped being a commission and became personal. That Leonardo saw something in this particular arrangement of light and shadow that he could not stop chasing. We don't know which of these is true. Possibly all three are, tangled together. But here is what we do know. The most famous painting in the world almost didn't exist as a public object at all. For over a decade, it existed as one man's private obsession, carried across borders, reworked in candlelight, shown to almost no one. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the painting's power has less to do with the woman in it, and more to do with the fact that her creator couldn't stop returning to her. Now, the smile. You already know the story. Why is she smiling? It's the question on every postcard, every quiz show, every tour guide's opening line, but that question on its own is a dead end. Because the smile isn't really a mystery about her, it's a mystery about you. Stand in front of the Mona Lisa and look at her eyes. The smile seems to lift, warm, almost amused. Now look directly at her mouth. It changes. Sometimes it looks like it fades entirely. Sometimes it looks almost sad. For centuries, people assumed this was just magic, genius, an unexplainable trick only Leonardo knew. Then, in the year 2000, a Harvard neuroscientist named Margaret Livingstone went looking for the actual mechanism. She found that the smile is rendered almost entirely in low spatial frequencies, the kind of visual information your peripheral vision is built to catch, but your sharp, focused central vision is not, in plain terms. When you look at her eyes or the space around her face, your peripheral vision picks up the smile and reads it as warm. But the moment you shift your gaze directly onto her mouth, your high-resolution central vision takes over, and that same smile seems to soften or vanish or shift into something more ambiguous. So the smile isn't changing, you are changing it every time your eyes move. Other researchers have proposed something even stranger, that the shifting expression may partly come from natural noise in the visual system itself. The same kind of static that makes a half-glimpsed shape in a dark room seem to move when it hasn't moved at all. Either way, the implication is the same, and it's the kind of detail that should make the hair on your arms stand up a little. Leonardo, 500 years before neuroscience, had language for spatial frequency, or peripheral processing, built a painting that exploits the actual architecture of human vision. He wasn't just painting a face. He was painting the experience of looking at a face, engineered so that the harder you try to pin the expression down, the more it slips away from you. That's not a trick of paint, that's a trick of perception itself, and it means something unsettling. Every single person who has ever stood in front of that painting has seen a slightly different Mona Lisa. Not because the painting changed, because they did. Once you start looking past the smile, the painting gets stranger, not simpler. Start with her identity. Most historians accept she was Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo, which is where the painting's other name, La Gioconda, comes from. It's even something of a wordplay in Italian, meaning the joyful one. But most historians accept is not the same as we know for certain. For centuries, alternate theories have circulated that she was a noblewoman, a mistress, even, in some of the more theatrical theories, a disguised self-portrait of Leonardo himself. None of these have displaced the standard account, but the fact that the debate still exists, 500 years later, about who this woman even was, tells you something about how much fog still surrounds this painting. Then there's the background. Look closely and something feels off, deliberately off. The horizon line on the left side of the painting does not match the horizon line on the right. The landscape behind her doesn't behave like a real landscape should. It folds and drifts the way a half-remembered place does, not a place you could walk into. Was this an error? Unlikely, from a painter this exact. Was it intentional disorientation, a way of making the space around her feel as unstable as her expression? Nobody can fully say, and that again is the pattern with this painting. Every question you ask about it produces not an answer, but another question. By the early 1900s, the Mona Lisa held a respected, but not extraordinary, place in art history. Critics generally regarded it as one of the finest portraits ever painted, perhaps the finest portrait of a woman, but it was not yet spoken of as the single greatest painting on earth. It was admired. It was not yet a phenomenon. That was about to change, and not because of anything Leonardo did, because of something that happened on a quiet Monday morning in August 21st, 1911, the Louvre is closed to the public, as it is every Monday. A maintenance day, quiet, mostly empty. A man in a plain white worker's smock moves through the galleries like he belongs there, because in a sense he does. He'd previously worked at the Louvre, building protective glass cases for the museum's paintings, including, months earlier, the very case now protecting the Mona Lisa. He knows that case from the inside. He knows how to open it in minutes. His name is Vincenzo Peruggia. He doesn't go for the diamonds. he doesn't go for the gold. He walks past treasures worth a staggering fortune and goes straight for one small wooden panel, roughly the size of a large book. He lifts the painting off the wall and strips away its protective glass case. He wraps it in his smock, tucks it under his arm, and simply walks out through a door that, in one almost absurd twist of fate, a passing plumber unlocks for him, mistaking him for museum staff. And here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Nobody notices. Not for an entire day. It isn't museum staff who discover the theft. It's a painter who shows up the next morning intending to make a copy of the Mona Lisa, only to find a blank space on the wall where she should be. The most famous painting in the world today was, in 1911, so unremarkable to the staff guarding it that its absence took 24 hours to register. Then the silence breaks, all at once. The story becomes the first piece of art news to circulate globally at speed, transforming the Mona Lisa almost overnight into a household name. Newspapers call it the most colossal crime of modern times. 60 police officers tear through the Louvre for clues. Passengers on outbound ocean liners are searched. A ship in New York Harbor is searched. And in one of the strangest detours in the entire saga, the poet Guillaume Apollinaire and the painter Pablo Picasso are actually arrested as suspects, swept up in an unrelated thread of stolen Louvre artifacts that briefly tangled with the bigger case. When the Louvre reopens 9 days later, thousands of people show up, not to see the Mona Lisa, but to see the empty space where she used to hang. Let that image sit with you for a second. People traveling, queuing, standing in silence, to look at nothing, to look at an absence. That is not how people behave around a painting. That is how people behave around a celebrity who has disappeared. Meanwhile, the painting itself sits hidden in a Paris apartment, tucked into the false bottom of a trunk, under Perugia's own bed, for nearly 2 years, while all of Europe searches for her. It isn't clever detective work that finally cracks the case. In late 1913, Perugia tries to sell the painting to a Florence art dealer named Alfredo Geri, using a thin fake name. Geri grows suspicious, quietly brings in an art expert to verify the work, confirms it's real, and calls the police. Perugia is arrested. He's eventually sentenced to a little over a year in prison, and strangely, treated by much of the Italian public less like a criminal and more like a folk hero because of the reason he claimed for the theft. A belief that the painting rightfully belonged to Italy, supposedly looted by Napoleon. A belief that, as historians later confirmed, simply wasn't true. The Mona Lisa returns to the Louvre in 1914. But she does not return as the painting that left. She returns as a celebrity. Here is the theory that should genuinely change how you think about this painting. What if the theft did more for the Mona Lisa's fame than 400 years of brushwork ever could? Before 1911, the painting was respected within art circles, but it was not a global icon. It was one masterpiece among many, admired by people who already cared about Renaissance art. The theft did something different. It pulled the painting out of the art world entirely and dropped it into the front page of every newspaper on Earth. A society of art patrons offered a cash reward for her safe return. A magazine offered an even larger one. For 2 years, she was less a painting than an ongoing news story, a missing persons case for a piece of wood and oil paint. And news stories create something paintings on their own cannot: suspense, stakes. A reason for someone who has never set foot in a museum to suddenly care whether she's found. By the time she was recovered, crowds were arriving at a rate of roughly 30,000 people a day just to see her. Not because the painting had changed, because the story around the painting had changed. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you if you let it. It's entirely possible that mystery, not mastery, is what built her fame. Ask yourself honestly, if the painting had simply hung undisturbed in the Louvre for the past 500 years, no theft, no headlines, no international manhunt, would it be the single most famous image on the planet today? Or would it be a deeply respected but quietly hanging Renaissance portrait, admired by scholars, unknown to almost everyone else? There's no way to run that experiment. We only get the timeline that actually happened. But the uncomfortable possibility is this. The painting didn't just survive the scandal. The scandal may be the reason she's a household name at all. Once a story like that exists, it doesn't stay contained. The Mona Lisa stopped being just a painting somewhere in the 20th century and became something closer to a symbol, a shape so recognizable that you can distort it, mock it, reference it sideways, and people will still instantly know what you mean. She's been given a mustache. She's been turned into advertisements for products that have nothing to do with Renaissance Italy. She's been referenced in films, parodied in cartoons, recreated in memes that strip away almost everything about the original except the silhouette and the smile. That is not something that happens to most masterpieces. It happens to icons. The Mona Lisa crossed some invisible threshold where she no longer belongs only to art history. She belongs to pop culture, to advertising, to the internet, to anyone with a printer and a sense of humor. A painting that 4 centuries ago was never even delivered to the family who paid for it is now arguably the most reproduced image in human history. So let's go back to where we started. The smile, it turns out, isn't a secret hidden in the paint. It's a side effect of how human eyes are built. A 500-year-old optical illusion that Leonardo seems to have understood before anyone had the science to explain it. The fame, it turns out, isn't simply a reward for genius. It's tangled up with a theft, a media frenzy, a missing persons case for a painting, and a public that fell in love with a mystery before they ever fully appreciated the masterpiece underneath it. And Leonardo himself, the one person who might have settled all of this, never finished the conversation. He carried her for over a decade, reworked her in candlelight, and died without ever fully letting her go. Maybe the greatest mystery here was never who she was. Maybe it was never really why she smiles. Maybe it isn't even what Leonardo intended when he picked up his brush in 1503. Maybe the real mystery is us. Why we needed her to be more than paint and wood. Why a theft turned a portrait into a legend. Why 500 years later, millions of us still stand in a crowded room, straining for a glimpse of a face that quietly refuses to hold still. Leonardo painted a woman. History turned her into a question we still haven't stopped asking.